place. So do we do nothing? Do we sit back and wait? How do we go about engaging with this step? What does that look like?
Right. Thanks, Mark. So we know that projects dominate the forest carbon landscape today. There have been a number of jurisdictional programs through the World Bank FCPF Carbon Fund, but those credits are not primarily directed toward the voluntary carbon market. And our coalition is calling for companies to create a demand signal for jurisdictional scale crediting, which includes both jurisdictional programs and projects that are nested into these programs. So then how do we reconcile reality of today with our need to achieve scale in a way that can be rapid enough so that we meet our 2030 targets? So this guidance encourages companies to secure these credits through forward purchase agreements with jurisdictions and with projects that are show all intent and progress towards becoming fully nested into these jurisdictional programs. And this is similar to what is often similar to project finance for forest carbon projects today, such as those, and including what is being done with the LEAF Coalition in terms of advanced purchase agreements secured with jurisdictions. At the same time, though, there's a significant gap in finance that is needed to get these jurisdictional scale programs to the point of being operational and issuing credits. So in these situations, companies can pioneer forward finance agreements that invest in these programs up front so that they can rapidly transition from what we all know as readiness, which is about building the elements of a RED program under the UNFCCC Warsaw framework, to operationalizing these programs that can generate carbon credits verified by a standard for the voluntary carbon market. And there's often a really significant gap between these two states. There are many examples of activities that need to be accomplished to achieve this. For example, updating national FRELs to include activities beyond just deforestation, or strengthening the National Forest Monitoring System, or implementing safeguards. And so, these are often require different sets of capacities, coordination across whole of government and finance. So I think forward finance agreements, which is also something that the project developer community is familiar with, can help to bridge that gap. And project developers and existing projects also have a lot of experience that is needed to engage in transactions and negotiating with buyers and companies. And so we encourage them also to bring this experience into the development of jurisdictional systems and to take all possible steps to high jurisdictional scale quality crediting as we seek to rapidly scale up demand. So during this transition, how do we even know that all of this activity is going to ensure high quality outcomes? So TFCI as a group, we have reviewed jurisdictional RED standards and has recommendations for companies on the standards that meet our criteria for high quality, obviously with the due diligence, additional due diligence that's built into that. And we have basically identified 4 basic tiers of buying preference that we suggest for buyers, differentiated by their progression toward jurisdictional scale crediting, either through a program or becoming nested into a program. And this is for the nesting. This is based on specific scenarios that have been identified by the standards themselves, and we look into those scenarios in detail. Just generally describe these tiers, the first order of priority for us is always recommending that companies prioritize credits that are directly available from initiatives that are led by Indigenous peoples and local communities, wherever available. And we know that there is a lack of availability of these credits right now. So thinking more broadly into initiatives that are fully nested into jurisdictional accounting, and from jurisdictions themselves that demonstrate very clearly that they respect the rights of forest owners, especially Indigenous peoples, to access carbon markets. And then we have other orders of preference that are based on, for buying tropical forest carbon credits, that based on the origination of the party originating the credits, and sort of where they are in this progression towards jurisdictional crediting, and where the country or jurisdiction is in terms of its progress and ability to make that progress within certain timeframes. And I think that's pretty much how we do that, and following the criteria all throughout.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Steph. If I could ask you a follow-on question, you know, sometimes there's a narrative or questions can be framed as, is it projects or jurisdiction? Just curious to get your quick views on that.
Thanks. So that's a really good question. I think what everybody recognizes, either from the project side or from the larger top-down jurisdictional side, is that we all need to rapidly scale up activity, right? So to move towards a larger scale, and then I think everyone is trying to work out how nesting is going to work, but it's clear that both that jurisdictions need support and to be able to bring other programs online, but that also projects have a lot to offer in terms of their experience, especially with private sector, in supporting those jurisdictions, and then to make sure nesting works in the right way for each individual jurisdictional context.
So not so much either or, a little more both and how do we bring things
Exactly.
together? Yeah, great.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Steph. Wanted to go ahead and move us through our third step, which is conduct due diligence. You know, critical, right? You know, if you're a company, you're doing due diligence across your strategic commodities, oftentimes as a matter of good practice. We'd see similarly there's value in doing this for your tropical forest carbon credit sourcing. Wanted to pass the mic over to Raisa. Raisa, we're thrilled to have you here from IPAM. And I'm going to ask you two questions. I'll start with, help us understand a little bit more, you know, why is there this need for doing due diligence above and beyond what's already in standards?
Bom, Mark, obrigada pela sua pergunta. Sim, a diligência prévia ela é um fator fundamental para que se garanta que as empresas elas estão comprando de créditos que são de fato créditos de alta qualidade, né? A gente sabe que tem diversos padrões. O guia mesmo, o nosso guia, nosso manual, ele indica alguns desses padrões, mas a gente sabe que esses padrões eles são diferentes em termos de exigência. Então, a diligência prévia ela consegue ir um pouco mais além do que esses padrões recomendam e garantem aí a comercialização de créditos de alta qualidade.
Raisa, thank you so much. And if we could, you know, we'd love to hear your perspective from Brazil, from being right there on the ground. Would love to hear any insights that you can share in terms of how you see this guidance as being relevant in the context of Brazil's prioritization of carbon credit generation, RED programming in the coming years. How can this be put to best use?
Para falar um pouquinho do futuro, né, dessa perspectiva de compra de geração de créditos de carbonos futuros, é importante entender um pouco a contextualização do Brasil, né? O que aconteceu com o Brasil. O Brasil é um país que foi sempre protagonista aí no desenvolvimento da sua política de clima, política de RED. Durante uma década, o Brasil ele conseguiu avançar bastante no desenvolvimento da sua estratégia nacional de RED. O Brasil desenvolveu um sistema robusto de MRV, monitoramento, reporte e verificação, avançou isso tudo a nível nacional, que eu estou falando. E aí culminou também com o Fundo Amazônia, que foi um fundo que gerou aí $1 bilhão para subsidiar essas políticas de RED do Brasil. E aí o que acontece? De 5 anos para cá, toda essa estrutura que a gente tinha conseguido construir, que a gente tinha conseguido galgar em nível federal, ela ficou, por questões políticas, por interesses políticos, ela ficou congelada e começou-se um processo de desmantelamento de tudo que a gente tinha, de tudo que tinha sido construído pelo governo federal para a política de clima, política de RED. E aí, nesse contexto, os estados subnacionais eles começam aí a se organizar, eles não queriam perder essa oportunidade, né, de RED, que estava crescendo em todo o mundo, do mercado de carbono. Então, os estados subnacionais eles começam a se organizar e começam a construir os seus sistemas subnacionais de rede, os seus sistemas jurisdicionais. O IPAN, que é a organização onde eu trabalho, apoia e apoiou a construção de alguns desses sistemas que estão baseados aí. Cada estado ele está em um nível diferente. Tem uns que estão mais avançados, tem outros que estão ainda no princípio, mas apoiamos aí, alguns deles conseguiram fazer uma nota conceito já para padrões altos de certificação, como o Art3. Grande parte deles submeteu aí uma manifestação de interesse para a coalizão LIVE. Então, esse é o contexto no nível federal e no nível estadual. E, ao mesmo tempo, tem também o que está acontecendo de 2, 3 anos para cá. As comunidades indígenas elas estão sendo procuradas por empresas que estão oferecendo aí também contratos para comercialização de créditos de carbono. No entanto, esses contratos eles estão sendo feitos aí sem muito respaldo, sem apoio técnico, sem apoio jurídico, sem que as comunidades elas tenham um processo de consenso entre si, sem consulta. Então, nesse sentido, esses projetos eles não estão sendo muito, enfim, muito bons para as comunidades, porque eles estão gerando certos conflitos, né? Então, nesse ponto, nós estamos apoiando, torcendo para que o jurisdicional ele consiga se desenvolver, e aí o guia orienta aí para que esses créditos de carbono que estão sendo gerados, para que eles, de fato, incluam as comunidades indígenas, as populações locais, para que eles tenham participação em todas as etapas de construção dos sistemas de rede. É preciso que se garanta aí uma repartição de benefícios justa e equitativa para que o recurso consiga chegar até a ponta, para que as comunidades participem da decisão final dessa repartição de benefícios. Enfim, linhas de base precisam ser conservadoras, corretas, né, críveis, para não gerar créditos irreais, enfim. Então, os sistemas jurisdicionais que estão sendo desenvolvidos na Amazônia, eles seguem todas as orientações do guia, e é por isso que o guia é útil para que as empresas escolham os créditos que tenham alta qualidade.
Raisa, thank you so much for that nuanced response. It really helps us get insight into what's going on ground in Brazil. We're all, I know, thrilled at the possibility of really driving ahead and accelerating efforts to conserve the Brazilian Amazon, and hopeful that this can be a good use case for helping companies who are purchasing carbon credits and maybe a bit removed from the Amazon to wrap their heads around some of the issues with all the carbon cowboys, as you noted, as well as helping to further strengthen some amazing advances with subnational RED programs already well underway. We want to stay on the due diligence topic for a few minutes more. We are thrilled again to have Juan Carlos Hintiach with us here today, representing COICA and Amazon Indigenous Federation, for those who are less familiar. And, Juan Carlos, wanted to ask you two questions, on the social safeguard side and how it relates back to these due diligence questions. We've all heard some of the challenges historically and currently with ensuring that Indigenous peoples can be effectively engaged and effectively leading and real champions in these efforts. Could you tell us a little bit more about how carbon crediting, as well as other initiatives, can support the goals and ambitions of Indigenous peoples? Over to you.
Muchas gracias. Espero que esté funcionando bien la traducción. Si no, va a tocar cambiar el switch y voy a hablar en inglés. Impresionante, y muchas gracias por la invitación. Va a ser un contexto, aquel mapa que sería muy bueno que todos recibieran, es una síntesis del proceso, cómo trabajar en articulación, en alianza, con los liderazgos territoriales, con los liderazgos de la COICA y los aliados que en la mesa de concertación construimos este tipo de mapas que podemos interpretar lo que está sucediendo minuto a minuto, esta dinámica. Todos los que hablaron aquí tienen una relación directa o indirecta con la COICA. La institucionalidad va primero, el relacionamiento institucional de la COICA y los aliados. Abrimos el documento, nos conocemos institucionalmente y entramos a conocer nuestras propuestas, nuestros trabajos. Es duro entender rápidamente el concepto de carbono, de mercados y cómo transmitir este lenguaje, empoderar en los propios idiomas de los dueños del territorio. Realmente es un reto, ¿no? Es un trabajo fortísimo. Yo escucho a ciertas entidades, aquí a las colegas financieras, especialistas, ¿dónde realmente va a acudir estos beneficios? Nosotros somos nominados, somos reclutados por esta nota científica que los pueblos indígenas han mantenido por años y años, y hay data científica que dice que estos créditos de estos bosques especiales de alta integridad están en los territorios indígenas. Pero hay una cuestión de quizás de transformar esto con una cuestión de penalidad. Si es que no deforestas, no es tuyo. Si es que no deforestas, no vas a ser beneficiario por tal contenido. Esto aprendimos de las lecciones de Red o Red Plus, con las salvaguardas, con los derechos de los pueblos indígenas en nuestras constituciones y nuestros territorios, seguridad territorial, como punto básico, y luego entramos a nuestra propuesta. Ya lo estamos haciendo, ya estamos trabajando. Bajo esa dinámica no es solamente un crédito de carbono, es un tema de beneficio, pero al mismo nivel. ¿Qué significa ser beneficiario? Somos iguales, tenemos conocimiento, hemos monitoreado, pero dame la oportunidad de sentarme contigo y transmitir mi conocimiento y darle un valor agregado. Ese valor agregado que tiene no es de Juan Carlos, no es de la dirigencia, viene de un proceso milenario, donde están nuestros ecosistemas y estos hotspots, la mayor biodiversidad que nosotros vivimos allí. Por eso nos conectamos, y yo estoy aquí participando en nombre de la dirigencia, en nombre del equipo técnico, científico, indígena, que somos parte de un diálogo. Eso construimos, y esos realmente, esos créditos que están para la integridad de valor agregado, como ustedes lo manifiestan, tiene un valor para el territorio, para los planes de vida que vivimos aquí, con tantas presiones. Y para mencionar y cerrar este círculo, las presiones son diarias: minería, petróleo, deforestación, y puedo seguir. Pero si existe el camino y darle la oportunidad a este pueblo indígena que pueda trabajar con su bosque, con su territorio, seguridad, derechos, autonomía, autodeterminación y el tema de gobernanza, bienvenido. Este trabajo ha sido muy fuerte y por eso agradezco esta invitación para mencionar en esta primera parte. Gracias, Mark.
Let's get a little round of applause. Thank you, sir.
I hope this was working in translation.
No, you're good. Thanks, Juan Carlos. If I could, I think that really helps us understand the broader context of how this can be so supportive of Indigenous peoples' priorities and why it's so important to get it right. If you could, a follow-on question, if you could help us, now get a little bit into the weeds of what this looks like in a given jurisdiction or a given project. If I'm a company, I hear a lot about benefits sharing. what would you tell companies to look for as they're evaluating the quality of benefit sharing programs? Over to you.
Muchas gracias. Mira, esto es importante. Cuando tú entras a una mesa de concertación, tienes que entender qué es lo que nosotros como pueblos indígenas venimos por años y años construyendo, elaborando, trabajando nuestros planes de vida y en el contexto de propuestas. Punto 1. Cuando nosotros consideramos que aquellas propuestas, esa dinámica, vamos a trabajar no solamente el concepto de beneficiario, es un concepto de equidad, de justicia a nuestro trabajo, reconocimiento a nuestro producto de titulación, de monitoreo y de gobernanza indígena con nuestros territorios. Bajo esa dinámica nosotros creemos, pensamos, no creemos, firmemente lo decimos, si hay principio número 1, seguridad, tenencia de tu territorio, vamos a continuar al segundo paso, planes de vida, manejo integral, que no podemos separar solamente el tema de carbono y separar del contexto de los lenguajes interculturales. Eso ha sido un trabajo tremendo. Cómo transmitir de un pueblo a otro en la cuenca amazónica con sus valores socioculturales, socioeconómicos, y en esa dinámica hemos dicho a las empresas, vas a entrar a mi territorio en base a la consulta previa libre informada, vas a entrar a mi territorio a concertar mis bosques. ¿Cuál tipo de beneficio? ¿Cuál es el beneficio? Nosotros no queremos un beneficio simplemente monetario, es el tema de vida, es el tema de dadores, monitores y cuidadores y dueños de ese territorio, simple. Eso tiene un valor y ese valor tiene justicia en número y la ciencia lo sabe y no es necesario recopilar y mencionar, Mark. Para terminar, este trabajo que se ha hecho con experiencia, tanto en Colombia, tanto en Perú, tanto en Ecuador, esta dinámica fue de paso a paso desde la comunidad hasta los niveles, hasta nivel nacional. Los mismos estados han reconocido que las mesas de trabajo igualitaria y de respeto, que las mesas de concertación son viables simplemente cuando hay respeto. Cuando no existe respeto y tu propuesta no es aceptada, no podemos entender. Y tienen que ser protectores de esta división que existe de los famosos Carbon Boys. Hay gente muy buena que quiere colaborar. Y esto yo hago un llamado desde la organización, que lo ha dicho los dirigentes, que si entran las compañías, a nombre de quién entran a dividir el movimiento, eso no lo vamos a permitir. Se denuncia y se va. Entonces, Mark, yo lo dejaría allí. Nosotros estamos ya trabajando la propuesta que se lanzó hace varios años, el Red Indígena Amazónico, que es la respuesta a la reacción climática a esta presión. Esa respuesta del Red Indígena Amazónico fue construido desde el propio sentimiento territorial, cultural, económico de todos los pueblos y naciones de los pueblos que vivimos dueños de bosques. Gracias.
Well, thank you again so much, Juan Carlos, for sharing all those insights. You know, some of these terms that we throw around as a community, high integrity, due diligence, it can sound kind of academic and dry and very distant. And so I really appreciate your insights. It brings it all to ground, right? Here's what it means in the real world. Here's what the stakes are. So thank you so much for that reminder. So we're moving now to step 4, following up with complementary actions and staying attuned to new developments. Thrilled to have Brittany from WWF here with us. Brittany, I'm going to invert the question sequencing here and would love to hear your thoughts on just what are some of those complementary actions. What are we talking about here? Over to you.
Thanks, Mark. So, in terms of other actions that companies can take to support jurisdictional performance, we think that there's significant risk in companies just waiting for jurisdictions to perform with just the promise of results-based payments. Some of my colleagues here have already talked about, Steph was talking about the real importance of the work, the implementation on the ground. And so companies importantly need to also be thinking about partnerships on the ground, building those, and thinking of themselves less as just buyers and more as partners that are responsible in helping address deforestation and support restoration more directly. So what that looks like is going to be aligning with all the other stakeholders that are involved. That includes government, that includes indigenous peoples, local communities, and others in terms of supporting the activities that are most important for jurisdictions to meet their sustainability goals. So a few examples of that are high-quality nature-based solutions. That could also be policy interventions. That could be direct support to indigenous peoples and local communities for things like land tenure security. And those things, in addition, are very important. And I'll just mention also supply chain responsibility, so meeting all deforestation and conversion-free commitments. So these are complementary actions that we think companies can take in addition to the purchase of high-quality carbon credits to combine them in order to get the results we want for people, nature, and climate in order to get us and unlock those results-based payments.
Thanks so much, Brittany. Here to that. You know, and if I could just kind of starting to step back a little bit, you know, as we move towards our recap and then Q&A, just help us understand what's the value that WWF has seen in this process.
Thanks for that question, Mark. So in terms of some of the issues we've seen with the voluntary carbon market, it's a tool that if used correctly, if designed correctly, can be very powerful. But we've seen in the past a track record that might be less impactful than we would like for a variety of different reasons. We see low demand, low prices in terms of the crediting, displaced responsibility from certain companies that might be purchasing credits instead of reducing their own emissions first and foremost, and an inconsistent application of standards. And that's really where the value of this group comes in. We're a very, as you could see, we're a very diverse set of organizations with global reach, and therefore we have a diverse set of views really on the role of voluntary carbon market. But that being said, we decided if we can get aligned on how we think companies should intervene and influence the voluntary market, and then companies then use that guidance when and if they are purchasing forest carbon credits, we can really influence the supply and increase the levels of integrity, quality, and scale, most importantly. And so really what we're seeing here is a differentiated demand from companies is so important to be able to raise the standards for equity, for inclusion, for meaningful benefit sharing. And that's really the influence that we're hoping to activate in companies through this.
So let's get to work, right? Thank you so much, Brittany. Now, before we open it up for Q&A, Jason, I wanted to pass the mic over to you. Any last reflections that you have on the value of coming together as one voice of civil society, or other general reflections based on all these insights from our amazing panelists?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for coming back. And I'll pick up right where Brittany left off. We are a diverse group, and I think the takeaways from our work here that we want everyone to leave this session with are really threefold. We've worked very hard to come together for this reason of sending the signal. This is important. We need companies to take action now. We need them to begin this planning. We need to channel their efforts and sort of this burgeoning demand into positive directions. So we wanted to speak with one voice on that in harmony so as to minimize the confusion and the messages that companies were hearing. The second takeaway is that we've worked very hard to try to center the perspectives of the indigenous peoples and local communities in this work and make sure that their preferences and views come through very clearly. I'll be the first to admit, big environmental organizations haven't always done a good job of that in the past. And we're trying to correct that with this process to really bring that front and center. You know, there used to be the mindset that the best way to protect forests is to keep people out. We're changing that completely and saying the best way to protect forests is to support the people who are there, who have been the forest protectors for generations and generations. Preserve their lifeways, give them the support they need, and look ahead, because the pressures are only going to keep increasing. Even if we're successful in mitigating climate change, the pressures are going to be increasing on these forests. So it's critical that we take action now. It's critical that companies begin to deliver that support now. The third key takeaway then is the direction of travel, and we've worked very hard to get aligned on this. The direction of travel is transformational. This isn't just small potatoes. This isn't just like go down to the carbon store, buy a few carbon credits and check the box. No, this is going to be a journey for companies. It takes 4 steps to get through this. They're going to have to do some work. They're going to have to do some extra due diligence themselves. And it's a long-term engagement. It requires planning, forward purchasing agreements, and really working with the people on the ground as partners, not just seeing them as secondary beneficiaries, or we're going to sprinkle a little carbon money that way. This is really a journey we have to take together. We're taking the journey together. The guide itself, I think, serves as an invitation to everyone to come along on this journey with us, to companies, to indigenous groups and local communities, to governments to help build the infrastructure we need to get through this journey together. And so if we're successful in that, we think we can accomplish the transformation that's going to be necessary over decades. So that's what I see. It's a big picture, Mark.
Well said, sir. Thank you so much, Jason. So as you can see, we've got behind us now the version 1 of the guidance, which was published in May. What we've just described today are some of the elements that have evolved since then. Again, plan your tropical forest credit portfolio. Go big, right? Try to do as much as you can to help us all get to zero deforestation by 2030. Build that portfolio to try and drive demand for jurisdictional crediting of high quality, of course, recognizing that projects are a part of that. And this is about both and, not either or. Keep your eyes on due diligence. Don't assume it all comes via standards. Just like if you're a company, you do with your other priority commodities. Please, let's keep in mind Juan Carlos's great appeals and examples. And then, of course, keep doing more, right? Follow up with complementary actions and stay engaged in the space. So more to come. Please join us in this. And we have about 10 minutes, so I'd love at this point to thank you again to our panelists. By the way, let's get a quick round of applause to our panelists. And I hope some folks were taking notes. We'd love to hear your questions. I think we're going to start with the round of 3. My colleague Braña is going to pass the mic around. Please just raise your hands and don't be shy. We'll get 3 and then we'll address from there.
Hi, thank you all so much for this really impressive collaboration amongst the leading institutions on this. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering what your reflections are about getting jurisdictional scale to really work well, and how you can leverage what's already worked for the SCPF projects and the countries that have already advanced in that space. Is there lessons learned? Are there ways that we can amplify that? How do you see these coming together for those projects that are already in that space?
Hi, thanks a lot. Very insightful presentation from all of you. I was wondering what's your thoughts, especially on the last 2 steps, which require a lot of internal skills within the companies, balancing with, I think, what was mentioned at the very end, like, the learning curve that even you, as environmental organization, you had to do. Don't you think it will kind of slow down, or at least, companies might risk to do things wrong because of this lack of knowledge? Thank you.
So keep them coming. We're going to go ahead and take these. I'll summarize briefly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as we move towards jurisdictional, how do we make sure that we're building upon what's already there in terms of FCPF or other projects? Question one, and question two, this is hard for companies. It's hard for everyone, even for us. So, how do we avoid risks of folks getting things wrong? Is that great? Why don't we just take some volunteers? We've got a great panel. Who wants to give? We've got 2 mics here. There we go.
I'll try to tackle a bit the question 2. So I totally agree with you, and I think we definitely need to think of this as a learning by doing process. It always has been, and it continues to be. I mean, we've seen this with Red Plus. It has a long history. A lot of organizations, countries have been working on it and continuing to work on it. The work's not done. So I think, yes, there is risk inherent, but there's a ton of risk of not doing anything, right? So we know that companies see the value in starting to undertake these activities. And so I think in partnership with, like I said, like organizations like ours and organizations on the ground, it's really building those partnerships and getting a lot of different stakeholders around the table to slowly build it. And as we've mentioned here, jurisdictional level is more complicated, but it's more complicated because it's more comprehensive, right? It gets all the different actors we need at the table. It gets at the scale that's really going to be transformational, like Jason was mentioning. And so although much more difficult than maybe some of the smaller scale activities, it's really going to get at the drivers of deforestation in a way that we can reach our 2030 goal. So I think
I can maybe speak to both questions. So maybe just really following up quickly on what Brittany was saying for part 2. Hopefully I'm not misremembering or misspeaking from what we've already agreed to, but I think there's something in the guidance that we have that says, look, this really is something that you need to keep reevaluating every couple of years, and not just as a company, but like the standards should be reevaluating their methodologies every couple of years. Every year that we're working on this, we're trying to set the bar as high as we can, but then every year we're getting new data and new learning, and so we shouldn't get complacent ever that we've kind of hit perfection, because we know nothing's perfect and we know we need to keep kind of working towards that. And so making sure it's a very continuous, intentional process, I think is a really key part there. For the question on FCPF, I guess 2 thoughts. So one, FCPF, maybe for those who don't know, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, it's been working since 2008. A lot of it has been mostly on RED readiness, so kind of all of the upfront things that countries have to figure out how to do. I think in general that took a little bit longer than everyone was hoping, but it also kind of showcased how incredibly difficult this all is. And so that's something that I think we want to continue to recognize going forward, that jurisdictional programs are not going to just appear out of thin air. We need to be very much focused on trying to kind of help countries move along this process. And in terms of lessons learned, I think it's actually a really interesting opportunity we have in the next year or two. The FCPF actually just started to issue the first credits to countries. So it's Mozambique and Costa Rica, and I think Ghana is next. So we're really at an interesting point where we can actually start to reflect and look at the verification documents and look at kind of what they've done and really start thinking about lessons learned and implementation. So I'm actually hoping that we will take the time to kind of reflect, especially over the next year or two.
Maybe just to add onto what Kelley and Brittany have said, I mean, we did spend a lot of time as our coalition looking at jurisdictional standards, and I think at a very baseline level, independent verification according to these standards is what you need to assure that you at least have a chance of having a high quality carbon credit from a jurisdictional program. With the there is all this there's additional due diligence that is recommended, but at the fundamental level, it is you relying on those standards, which are quite rigorous, like following Cancun safeguards, a lot of the requirements for environmental integrity, social integrity that we believe are necessary for a high integrity carbon market, and then making sure that these programs are in compliance with those standards. And I would just add that in terms of making sure that these programs are high quality, we really do recommend that project developers and stakeholders from all over the jurisdiction do a sort of iterative engagement with the jurisdiction to the extent that they have the resources available to do so. And then we do list a number of activities and types of engagement that companies, as well as all these other stakeholders, can engage in the development of this jurisdictional program, especially to kind of track its progress over time.
Thanks so much for those thoughtful responses. I think we're coming to the end of the session, but I just wanted to do a last canvassing here, a last question from the audience. Please, go for it.
Hi, two quick questions. First one, what do you think global law firms could do to help you promote the guide, but also engage with our own clients? And also, in your coalitions, it's great to see civil society coming together. To what extent do you engage companies along your own journey?
Thank you so much. So quickly, just to make sure we all could hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand, how can global law firms support in this effort? What's that? Oh, this is where our delightful arrangement becomes a little bit challenging. Yeah? All right, good. Okay, so role for global law firms and in helping advance these efforts, and oh my gosh, I'm coming from the Pacific U.S. and so the 9-hour time zone change is just blasting me. What was this? How does our coalition engage companies effectively? I'm so sorry, y'all. Please, let's just try. Maybe we can try and get like a 30-second round the horn from a couple folks, just briefly.
I can speak to the second part a little bit. I mean, I think all of our organizations are being approached by companies all the time on a daily basis saying, tell us what to do. So that was one of the reasons why we all saw value in creating this product that's consistent. So we're giving them back consistent messages. There's no confusion. And so I think the engagement is happening. We also wanted to put out the guide because we know we're not talking to all the companies. This is a product that sits out there. They can go read it, they can go find it, they can work their way through the steps on their own. That's the goal. That's what we're aiming for with this product, is that this is something that they can work through and implement without us holding their hand for every step of the way.
So we're at time here, so just stay with us 1 minute. Juanca, maybe 30 seconds, and Raisa, and then we'll go ahead and wrap. Mi estimado.
Oh, I really think that your question is very important because I just want to recognize that my brothers and sisters, they are doing a lot of effort, but they need support and different lines, not just financial support, but the human, scientific also. And then we need to prepare ourselves together, be transparent with information, and then we can talk directly to them. They don't be scared of us. We can see that we are not going to kill them. We need to work, and we need to work with something, with an emergency, what's going on the ground. Tipping point for us and the Amazon, and we are equal, on the same level. We have knowledge. What else we need to show you? We have everything. We are donors for life. We have everything on the ground.
So one point is that to engage the companies is that if they don't buy high quality credits, they can suffer reputational risks. And for a company, this is, I think it is a strong argument. So that's my point.
So we're at time here. Really appreciate your questions, if any, and we'd love to keep the dialogue going, particularly on the global law firm bit. There's a lot of legal advisory that's required at various levels around carbon rights and other dimensions here, so it's just one concrete example. Thank you all so much for your time. We continue to build this together. We'd love to get your feedback, thoughts, and continue to, move as one community towards driving for the outcomes we want at scale and really harnessing the potential of carbon markets to drive big wins for climate, people, and nature, particularly in tropical forests. Please give again a big round of applause to our panelists, and we look forward to talking with you further after the event.